Welcome to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus. We're studying the book of Acts, and we have 2 chapters left. Tonight is Acts chapter 27. A very exciting, and if you were a sailor, nautical voyage-filled chapter. I'm not a sailor. I was born and raised in Kansas in the middle of the United States. Sailing was something that I did with a little plastic item in my bathtub. I never went to an ocean until I was approximately 28 years old. It was startling. I remember getting in a boat with a friend in 1979 in San Francisco Harbor. A fairly small craft. He and I had been friends some years earlier. He had moved to California to marry and to do his job, and I had never been in a boat on an ocean. This was San Francisco Harbor. It was a very tough time for me. I'd never experienced waves that crashed sideways against a boat. I'd been on a cruise in 1977 it was a honeymoon. But it's a giant ship, and you don't really think about it except the first 30 minutes when you're getting a little queasy. But after that, you forget that you're on an ocean. You forget that you're crashed because these ships are so able to handle the difficulties of the ocean. The Apostle Paul was not on such a ship. The Apostle Paul was on a small craft, though it was a craft that wasn't designed for ocean travel as much as Mediterranean Sea travel, and it was a cargo ship that carried grain from Alexandria over to Rome. That's where we're going to see in the story tonight a fascinating tale of the prisoner becoming the captain. Can you hear the sound of the crashing waves? Can you feel the energy inside the folks as they're scared for their lives? Sometime over that 13th and the 14th day, can you hear people's stomachs growling? There's so much in this that's vivid and alive. I love what Luke did, the beloved physician Luke, has done with this text in helping us travel. This is a travel log. It's a great travel log, and I feel like I'm there. I started to get nervous. I'm sweating. I'm worried. I'm hungry. I'm getting all this. I recommend to the people who listen online that they Google Paul's journey to Rome, and there will be some 2D or 3D map if they're lucky. He really starts in Jerusalem because that's where he officially started his journey. And then he went to Caesarea up along the coast, and then the official trip that we read tonight began as he moved up. You can see it from here. Up along here, and then this zigzag along the coast of Asia Minor that is so difficult. They had a single sail. See, we're used to Sydney to Hobart races, and they've got these giant ships that get anywhere and everywhere quickly, whether there's a wind at your face or a wind against you. It doesn't matter. Left to right, right to left, they can handle it. But they had a single sail on these ships, and that single sail might have been made of skins or of some kind of cloth, and it didn't handle contrary winds. It was stuck there. You wouldn't leave it up. If a contrary wind is coming at you, you drop it so that it wouldn't push you backwards. So that's why you can get this zigzag happening here along the Asia Minor coast. We get introduced to several characters on the boat. I like that. Who's who on the ship? I always like to know who else is along with me when I'm traveling. I was on an airplane last Friday and arrived back Sunday morning here in Sydney, and there were about 350 of my closest friends were on the airplane. No, I didn't know any of them. But what was fascinating, I was wearing my Jews for Jesus badge. I sat down in the plane, and there was a young couple just back from their honeymoon who sat down next to me in the middle and inside seat. And the man said, "Oh, a young couple, I rather like your badge." I said, "Oh, thank you. It's very nice." He said, "Is your last name Mendelsohn?" Yeah. All of a sudden, now I'm wondering where else I have my name written. He said, "Do you have a daughter named so-and-so?" I said, "Yeah." And my brother went to school with her at such and such high school back 10 years ago. I said, "Wow." And all of a sudden, though a little surprising, I suppose I could have titled it. It was very comforting to know that I had partners along the route. And I feel that way sometimes. There was a lady who was called to the counter in San Francisco, Ludmilla something. I could have told you that night. I can't tell you now 5 days later. But she was needing passport control, meaning she had to show her passport and they had to stamp it to allow her to leave America or to enter Sydney, either one. But I knew her name, and I saw her on the ship, on the airship. So I felt like I was knowing some of the people. And I asked my flight attendant, "What's your name?" And she said her name was Linda. And I said, "Oh, nice to meet you." And Gary was there, who had been on a flight which I'd taken a week before. So I met Gary, the other flight attendant. Oh, of course, there were many others. But all of a sudden now I'm feeling comfortable because, like here at Bible class, I know names. I don't necessarily know what Gary or Linda had for lunch, but I know that they are there to attend to my needs, and I'm there. There's something comforting about knowing names. I don't know what it is, but knowing who's who on the ship may have given Paul comfort. Who else went on that ship? Take a look at verse 2. His name is Aristarchus, a Macedonian of Thessalonica. Do you remember that name? Aristarchus? He was mentioned several times. Let me give you the references. He came to faith in Thessalonica in Acts chapter 19. The city was filled with confusion, Acts 19:29, and they rushed with one accord into the theater, dragging along Gaius and Aristarchus, Paul's traveling companions from Macedonia. He was with Paul at the Ephesian disputation, Acts chapter 20, verse 4. He was accompanied by Sopater of Berea, the son of Pyrrhus, and by Aristarchus, Secundus of the Thessalonians, Gaius of Derbe, Timothy, Tychicus, and Trophimus of Asia. What else did Aristarchus do? He was arrested with the Apostle Paul, and he accompanied Paul to Jerusalem and was there for the 2.5 years that Paul was under that trials that happened over that extended time. And now we see him in chapter 27, verse 2, embarking along with Paul, accompanied by Aristarchus. Now, there's only one way that Aristarchus could have gone along, and that's if he were a co-prisoner with the apostle. He put up his hand to be indentured, maybe even as a servant. You know, if you arrest somebody at King's Cross, and he's there with 2 other people, do the police put the 2 other people in the paddy wagon? Only if they're under arrest. But if they're not under arrest, they don't go. So Aristarchus somehow, in a similar way, is here in the ship with the apostle and with Luke. Luke, look at that, verse 2. Put out to sea, accompanied by... We put out to sea, Luke says. We put out to sea. Who's we? That's Luke who's writing. And Paul and Julia and this fellow who's in charge of the ship. This is pretty interesting. I don't know if Aristarchus is arrested, but in Colossians chapter 4, take a look there. Colossians 4, see if you can see this. See what you read. Paul, who writes this from prison, we just don't know which prison. In verse 10 of Colossians chapter 4, who's there? My fellow prisoner sends his greetings to the brothers in Colossae.
Would you say that Luke was a fellow prisoner?
You would think so. He's a physician, but he must be under house arrest, or he's indentured himself to the apostle, saying, I'm his servant, and therefore the Romans will take Paul and his slaves. If Luke is not a prisoner, then he must be a slave. The apostle Paul knew how to keep friends. However it was that these fellows put up their hands to go, Aristarchus, you know, if he wasn't a prisoner, and you don't see a record of that, he could have gone back to Macedonia, could have gone back to anywhere where they'd had successful ministry. But he hung out with Paul because that's where the action was. Hung out with Paul because Paul was a man who was a courageous man, a hero in every best sense of the word. You watching the Olympics? You watching any of the skiing and you hear people say, there's a true Canadian hero. Why? Because he skated quickly? Or because he jumped down a mountain full of snow? Or he successfully negotiated the moguls in the fastest time with the most points accrued? Those aren't heroes. Those are just good sporting fellows. A hero is someone who looks at a situation like Paul's gone through over these weeks and months and years that we've noted his story, and maintained a kosher life, a living life of love for the Lord and love for other people. That's a hero. Don't ever let people tell you that a hero is a rock star because they know how to sing and gyrate Those aren't heroes, although they can act heroically if they raise funds for Haiti. You see what I mean? But a hero is somebody who lives a courageous life and whom you want to emulate, not just whose music you want to purchase at the sanity.com. There are plenty of people who are on this grain ship coming from Alexandria, Egypt, and they've joined up and they catch them, and that's the ship that's going to be run aground at the end of the chapter. So yeah, these are not prisoners, these are workers, these are laborers, they're wharfies.
But at least 100 of them would be soldiers.
Well, that's a centurion, that's right. Well, you'd think so, that he would have carried his century of soldiers with him, his 100 folks. Let's introduce ourselves to another one. We've got Aristarchus, we've got Luke, who also stays with Paul to the end of his days. We've got number 3, this fellow named Julius, who, as you've pointed out, is a centurion. There are other prisoners on the ship. We see that in verse 1. We see Paul and some other prisoners. But look how Julius treats Paul, verse 3. This is when they're up in Sidon. Okay, we know Tyre and Sidon, Lebanon, that's where it is. That's where they are. So they've already put out from Caesarea, and now they're here in Sidon. And Julius treats Paul with consideration and allows him to go to his friends and to receive care. This is offshore. He gets his first 3-day weekend to go into town. And where does he go? He goes to a place he's never been. Paul's been to Tyre before, but we never see recorded that he went to Sidon, which is down the road. How are these people his friends? They were believers in Yeshua, and as a result, they were family. That's it. It would be like somebody getting off a boat at Circular Quay and saying, I've heard there's a Jews for Jesus in Sydney. I don't know any of them, but they're my mates. And they come right here, they take the taxi or they take the train, and they get off and they come in and they say, hi, you're my brothers and sisters. And man, we give them a hug. And it's right. That's what family is. They just know by the name. Well, that's what he did. There wasn't a bookstore in Sidon called Jews for Jesus Bookstore, but it was a similar thing. He'd heard there were believers, and he went there. I remember going to Seoul, Korea with my daughter when she was 15, so about 4 years ago. And I'd had an invitation to go and preach at a particular Presbyterian church, and I went there. And we had several days before my next appointment. And what we did, we just walked through town and looked for people carrying Bibles. And we sat in a McDonald's. I'll never forget this. A McDonald's doing email as you do when you travel. Free Wi-Fi. And we saw a young man, about 30 years old, who was reading his well-worn Bible. And I got into a conversation with him. He knew English well enough. Turns out that he was a leader in a group called Business Bible Belt there in Seoul, which is a confederation of Bible groups all over town, mostly with young executives and people who work for Sanyo and Sanyong and Sony and LG and all these places. And they invited me to 3 different groups over the next week to speak to them about Yeshua and my own testimony, and we encouraged one another. But that's what it felt like. I got off the boat, all right, at 7:47, but it was a community that God gave me, and I encouraged them, and they encouraged me. And one of the best ways to make friends is to say, I need care. You look at the end of verse 3, and to receive care. And we don't know why Paul needed care. He probably didn't need medical attention since he had Dr. Luke with him.
But I think he needs social intermingling because his own people. And
that's it.
He don't feel alone. He doesn't feel insecure.
Yeah. Now, he's traveling with Aristarchus and Luke, so does he really need fellowship? Okay, so he wanted to give to them and, in a way, receive care from the believers. It might have been that they had heard some bad things about him. Remember, there was bad reputation about the apostle early on. Question. And maybe they still had some misimpressions, or maybe they had true impressions. Either way, he wanted to go and be with his family. And that's the way to live. I appreciate that about the apostle. Well, they're there, and they put out to sea, and they sail under shelter of Cyprus because the winds were contrary, so they had to go back and forth. That's zigzag. Sailed along, and the detail on this is fantastic. So they found a ship sailing for Italy, and he put us aboard it. This is a safer ship because he's charged to tend to them. Remember, we saw that in Acts chapter 16 when the Philippian jailer had discovered that the people were surely missing. He was going to thrust himself on a sword, because if you don't protect your prisoners, you are going to be held to account for them. And whatever sentence they were going to receive, you will receive as the jailer. So if there's a jailbreak, you might as well cash up your chips. You're dead. So here Julius says, I think I'm going to put them on this bigger ship. This will be safer. It'll get us there more clearly. It was a big old mariner ship, okay, and they were traveling. Then we sailed slowly. I like verse 7. It's not just we sailed, we had a nice time. We sailed slowly. I like the detail of Luke. You can count on his veracity because he's not shy to tell you when things are good and when things are bad. Don't you like that about a journal? You don't have to wonder, is it all like so many ancient books that we would call, using the word hagiography. You know that term, hagiography? Hagios means a saint. When you make a saint into more of a saint than he really was or she really was, you're practicing hagiography. When you say, oh, the Apostle Bob, he was so wonderful, he never sinned. He always treated everything with such care and kindness. And you say, wait a minute, I remember that day he was a little short-tempered. Oh no, the Apostle Bob, he always was filled with graciousness. And you think, so if 20 years from now I could become like this saint with the superest halo that ever was, but real people really know who I really am. See? So Luke is, you can count on him because he's not amplifying the message with unnecessary hagiography. You can see Paul tonight saying, I told you so, which is not exactly a holy thing to do. See, when they're having trouble sailing, and he says, and we might as well tell you where it is now. Do you see where it is? You should have listened. It's in verse 21. They'd gone a long time without food. Paul stood up in their midst, meaning not at the end, but right dead center, and says, men, you ought to have followed my advice. I told you so. Now, that's not exactly a holy thing to say, is it? See? So I think Luke's humanness and Luke showing Paul in his humanness helps us see when Paul is acting in a holy and a demonstrably divine way. That amplifies the God in Paul, not the Paul of God. And that's what a true saint is. Someone who knows who they're not and someone who knows who God really is. Don't ever get that confused. Oh, my pastor is the most wonderful. He's holy. They never sin. They always are generous. They're always praying. They pray 13 hours a day. My pastor. When you start doing that, you might as well put up a statue to your pastor in your room and light a candle to him and devote yourself to your pastor. That's not what God wants, nor what your pastor wants. What any good man of God and woman of God wants for you is that you adore Yeshua, that you love Yeshua, and that when they do something good, that you adore the Yeshua in them. Fall in love with the God of Bob, not the Bob of God. You see what I mean? The detail is clear. The sailing slowly, verse 7, for a good many days. He's not being as detailed as he is on some things. 276 sailors. Or when they collected 153 fish after the resurrection. I love the detail of the Bible. When you need it. And when you don't need it, you don't need it. So after many days. But what we do get is a particular day that is listed. Where's that? Verse 9. According to the people who study this, the Day of Atonement, Yom Kippur, fell out that year, 59 AD, on the 5th of October. You could punch that in your calendar program. There's an app for that. And you could find out 59 AD, what day was Yom Kippur, and it'll show you. And it was the 5th of October. So what do we do with that? We know that the winds in those times, people don't travel the Mediterranean Sea after November with a big old grain shipment. You just don't do it. It's too dangerous and it's much more wintry. Look at the map today of winter in Europe, and it's February, and you'll see that there's a reason for that. But they would certainly sail in September. However, the apostle says, when we get to Crete, this little island here, let's stick it out in Fairhaven for a while, because he knows that it's not safe to travel. Now, he's a prisoner. Who's he to advise the captain of the ship? Is he a sailor? What did he do for a living? Well, it could be tanning. It could be making tents. Either one, they both used the same hides. And so whatever it wasn't sailing. He was born in Tarsus. hung out there. He went to school with Gamaliel. I mean, he's not a sailor. He's not Popeye, for goodness sake. I like that. Verse 9, considerable time had passed. That could be months. It would have taken months and months and months. And Luke is not being detailed because he forgot or didn't chronicle it. When he's specific, he is specific. When he's not, he's happily general. That helps me have more confidence when he is specific. Do you understand that? When he's general, it amplifies the veracity of the specific. So the voyage is now dangerous. Since the fast, Yom Kippur, was over. And he said, hey, this is going to be really trouble, Sheduli. Not only the cargo and ship, but also for our lives. Friends, we've got trouble coming ahead. And while we're on this ship traveling, can I recommend that we bunk down there on Crete? But the harbor wasn't suitable, and they decided, no. Why is it not suitable for wintering? It's not the harbor wasn't a place you could land, but there might not have been housing enough for the 276. There might not have been a town enough to handle all of them for the winter. There are lots of things that are required, not just having a big dock. Are there supplies to get them through and everyone through for the winter? The majority reached a decision to put out to sea. I like that. There's some.
How cold does it get?
Well, certainly when the wind is blowing, it's not going to freeze. The Mediterranean's not going to freeze. But the winds and the air can make it down to what we would call wind chill -10, -20. It could really feel like that, even though it never freezes, literally. And the closer you are to an island, the lower the temps can get. So it's tough out there. And they decided that it would be better if they could reach Phoenix, a harbor of Crete, which faced a certain way, and spend the winter there. So then this wind came up. They thought they'd gained their purpose. They weighed anchor. That means they pulled up their anchors and traveled along Crete close inshore. But then this violent wind came in and moved them out. The ship got caught in it, couldn't face it, gave way to it, and we were tossed in the sea. We had no control. Then they got close to this island called Clauda and scarcely able to keep it under control. They used supporting cables to undergird the ship. It's like they wrapped these cables around the bottom of the ship, like making a circuit of chains from top to bottom, all the way around both sides, encircling it, preserving the bottom of the ship and the top together, almost like you would do when you glue two pieces together. You wrap something around to hold it in place. They feared they might run aground on the shallows of this Syrtis. Syrtis is fascinating. It's over back in Alexandria. It's over back in Egypt. And there were graves there. There were nautical graves. I forget what they called it. But it was like a play on the words of Syrtis and cemetery. And it was because so many people were crashing, coming from wherever they were traveling in the Mediterranean down. They got caught in these winds, and they thought, we're dead men. That's a better way to say it. That picks up what Syrtis is. So they let down the sea anchor and let themselves be driven along. So they're using these anchors to try to position themselves, to try to fix themselves and steer when they have no control. And that is so human. When everything's being tossed around you, you try to, I'll stabilize myself, I'll stabilize my situation, I'll stabilize my life, and all the other things around. I think that's what President Obama is doing with the American financial crisis. In trying to stabilize it. Here, we'll throw $787 billion at this. Here, we'll do this kind of thing. We'll do that kind of thing. And really, when you're being tossed, you have no control, even if you think you do. And that's what's going on here. You've seen movies in modern days where they have these giant ships, and they try to put down their anchors, and they're just ripped out. You know, the anchor goes into the sand out in the middle. If you're traveling too fast, the anchor does no good. It's only when you are settling that an anchor settles you. So there's a time when it works and a time when an anchor will not work. They're being violently storm-tossed. And now, verse 18, they start throwing cargo out. Cargo, what do they have? They've got this grain that they brought from Egypt. It's their money. It's their livelihood. Have you ever been, it'd be like a FedEx ship, an airship that's coming today into Sydney Airport. And it's filled with packages that people have sent. And it gets to Sydney, and there's a crew of people ready to take those things off. But if there's nothing there, everybody will be unhappy. So when you jettison the cargo, you are inviting trouble later on. There's only one reason to do it. What's that? Save your life. You care more about your life than the financial ruin that you're going to experience. They did something with Jonah with that, didn't they? studied Jonah last week. Well, that's a study that we'll recommend others listen to in our interrupted Acts studies. On the third day, verse 19, they threw the ship's tackle overboard with their own hands. They are so famished. They're so hopeless in knowing if that will work. Verse 20 says, it's been a lot of days since the sun and stars appeared. What does that tell you? What do you use sun and stars for? Navigating, that's right. And so now they don't even know where they are. They don't have GPS. They are lost at sea. You're lost. You're upset. You don't know what's going on. And this prisoner is telling you, I think we should have stayed back there in Fairhaven. No small storm was assailing us. In other words, man, oh man, it felt like we were being pummeled by the rains and the thunders. Have you ever been outside in a very severe storm? Ever been caught? Yeah, you catch one of those hurricanes or just a major storm, a typhoon or a cyclone up in Darwin somewhere. You can imagine when the rains come and pummel you, they're not coming vertically. They're coming horizontally, aren't they? Those rains that come sideways, you have no protection. You can't go downstairs to the 13th deck and watch TV until it passes. They are stuck up top. It's not a pleasant situation. And from then on, all hope of our being saved was gradually abandoned. And they're starving. Why are they starving? They had all this food. They would have thrown it overboard, that's right. And yet, see, I don't think they ate it while they had it. And anyway, it was just grain. It's not prepared. It's not baked. So it's just grain of wheat or corn. And you can nibble and you can eat. I think they were somehow not eating it because it belonged to someone else. And then they started throwing it overboard thinking, somebody said, maybe we should eat this, at least get some benefit out of it. They hadn't eaten, and so maybe seasick. Some argue that there is a fasting going on declared by the apostle. I don't see that necessarily in the text, but some commentators mention that. They'd gone a long time without food. Paul stands up and says, I told you so. And yet, verse 22, I urge you to keep up your courage. There shall be no loss of life among you, but we're going to lose the ship. The apostle takes a very difficult moment and proclaims that they're going to be saved. Not one of you is going to die. Now, he's a prisoner, for goodness sakes. He doesn't know who's driving the ship. He doesn't know where they are either. Same clouds and stars are gone. How does he know this?
To the Holy Spirit.
That's really it. He's a man of courage based on faith in what God has said by the Holy Spirit. There's no other way. We don't see, and the Lord came to him, but that's what he references. Verse 23, for this very night, an angel of God to whom I belong and whom I serve, this God, I'm trying to talk to you people, I'm talking about God, the one God, not all these other gods. I'm telling you this God has told me, he sent an angel. And the angel said, don't be afraid, you're going to stand before Caesar, and everybody else is going to make it too. So he's confident that what he heard in the Spirit is from heaven. And he declares it. That's pretty bold. He didn't turn and say, hey, Luke, what do you reckon? You think that's the Holy Spirit, or am I just kind of wishing it? He had confidence to declare it because God spoke to him. When you do, there you go. Nothing left. You just speak it. Therefore, now it wasn't just Paul who received the courage to not be afraid. Now Paul says, therefore, keep up your courage, men. For I believe, God, that it'll turn out exactly as I told you. I believe, so you be courageous. That's the instilling of faith that he was constantly about. And perhaps that's why Aristarchus and Luke wanted to hang with him. Don't you like being around men of faith? People who really know God and emanate God. They're not just quoting Bible texts. That's okay, and I'm never going to demean that. But it goes beyond that to people who say, this God about whom I've been talking, I really think he's real. And you'll know something about yourself and your own faith walk when you want to be or don't want to be around those people. If you want to be around those people, you're a person who's going towards God. And if you don't want to be around God talkers, then you're pulling away from God. And let that be a warning, I suppose, to you, that when you catch yourself saying, they're always talking about God and Jesus, and they love Jesus, and they want me to embrace and follow and read the Bible. And if you're exasperated rather than enthralled by the people of God, you've got to check your heart. And all you have to do is listen to that man of God who says, be of courage. And you say, I'm taking that on board. I'm taking that on board. That's for me. And I like that. And so I sometimes watch Christian TV. I listen to Christian radio sometimes on the internet. I rather enjoy it. When I'm back in the States, I'll be back for a 2-week speaking tour next month. And I will get a rental car, and there will always be, 3 or 4 preachers on at the same time on different radio stations where I'll be. That's a little bit too much choice, but still, I will have an opportunity to listen to good godly music. I do that on my internet radio here. Godly music that really encourages me to believe. Friends, I can't tell you, I can't stress it more, how important it is to be among believers and believing with them. What that does to your heart, it gives you the anchors that are better than those anchors that drag through the sand and the silt in the Mediterranean. It gives you an anchor of hope. That's what Paul writes to the Thessalonians. An anchor of faith and an anchor of love, surrender, thanksgiving. It'll give you all these good, deep, rich anchors. But the anchor of hope is number one. That's the helmet of that'll guard your mind in Yeshua. Paul wrote to the Thessalonians. He says, but still we're going to run into a certain island. So 14 nights had come. We're driven about in the Adriatic. About midnight, they think we're going to catch some land because they did some ding, ding, and it came back 20 fathoms, then it came back 50. So they're sure they're going to run aground. They throw these anchors down. They must have had an awful lot of them, and it didn't work. And the ship is ripping out those things. Paul says to the centurion, he now turns from prisoner to captain. Again, verse 31, and says, unless these men remain in the ship, don't jump out on those little lifeboats. Everybody's got to stay together. That's the only way we all are going to be saved. In fact, you yourselves, he really makes it implied there that it's you Romans who are going to try to jump ship. You can't even be saved. You're going to be dead. So you better stay with me. Sort of, I'm the lucky charm, buddy. I'm the one who's prophesying. I'm the one who's got the real faith. You jump ship now, you're going to be dead in the water. Hang with us. Well, the soldiers cut away the ropes of the little boats, and they let that lifeboat fall away. That's faith. See how faith leads to more faith? My faith leads to your faith. Your faith leads to your neighbor's faith. This coming weekend, Rochelle's been doing this for a while, but we're going to be handing these out. We're going to letterbox these. We need help. We're inviting people to come and do a block in Bondi or a block in Rose Bay or a block. This Saturday we're doing it. And we're going to get 8,000 of these flyers about the Forbidden Peace DVD into the letterboxes of Jewish and Korean and Lebanese, whoever lives there in these places, Double Bay. We're going to go all over the place. 3-hour segments on Saturday. It's going to be pretty tremendous. And if we don't get it all done, we'll do it on Tuesday or Thursday. And we'll just keep doing it until we get all 8,000 out. But we're going to pass on faith because we've got faith. We've got something God's given us. We ought to get out there and tell people. And when they hear it, what does it do for them? It builds their faith. So they cut it away. And verse 33 now, until the day was about to dawn, Paul was encouraging them all. Everybody should eat. So take some food, eat it. He took some bread, broke it, gave thanks. Sounds like communion. It's not. He broke it, began to eat, and they all were encouraged. They all took food. 276 of them. They'd eaten enough. And then they started throwing more wheat into the sea. They couldn't recognize the land, but they did see a bay with a beach. And they said, that ought to do. They cast off their anchors and flew right into the beach. The vessel ran aground. Everything stuck, remained immovable. Then the back of the ship starts breaking up. And the soldiers, what do they do in 42? They think they're going to, what's happening for the soldiers? Why do they want to kill prisoners? Well, again, it's that problem of the soldier is responsible. If he doesn't produce the prisoner, dead or alive, then he's going to be guilty of the charge of the prisoner, so that none should swim away. But the centurion kept them from killing each other. Look, the centurion, this guy, Julius, I really like him. He had respect. He had kindness. I think Paul was noting him. I think Luke noted him in the beginning of the voyage as a kind and respectful man. And that's his energy and purpose now at the end, protecting all the prisoners, which would have included Aristarchus and Luke and Paul and all the heteros, all the others in this assorted, I think that was verse 1, these other prisoners. Pretty good to have such a jailer along with you. He's not far from the kingdom, is he? Julius is. Those are the kind of people you want to be around when you're on a boat. or in life. So Paul's prophecy was found true. Everybody survived, and thus it happened. That's what it says, verse 44. They were all brought safely to land. It's like a Aesop's fable or something. It's Hans Christian Andersen, and they all lived happily ever after. Now, we're not done with the story, and we have chapter 28 to finish up the story next week. But it's pretty remarkable that they survived through all this thick and thin, through all this problem of hunger and tempest and storm. Why? Because God was preserving Paul, that he might get to Rome. That's what Paul heard in the prophecy, in the vision, if you will. That's what he declared. It didn't cause it to happen, but it sure did advance the cause of faith. Yeah. Friends, that's what we need to do in our circumstances of life. We need to be declaring what we know to be true to those around us. It doesn't make it happen. It doesn't ensure it's happening, but it does play its role in the happening of our lives. That's why we do what we do. We tell people about Yeshua. Does it cause them to believe? It doesn't hurt. Will they believe without our telling them? Well, somebody's got to tell them. Altogether, the people stayed loyal to Paul, not to their captain. The people stayed loyal to Paul and didn't jump ship. People stayed loyal to Paul, and maybe they'll stay loyal to the God of Paul. That's what we're going to find out in our next episode.
You've been listening to the Bible class of Jews for Jesus in Australia. For more information, contact us at Jews for Jesus, Post Office Box 925, Sydney, Australia, 2001. God bless you.